Anyway, that's enough about me. So, the Hago years, Dad. So you joined Hago in 1960?
1st of November 1960. I had a look through, and I've got my appointment letter here, dated 1st November. That's when I started. And confirming, this is to confirm your appointment with this company, commencing November the 1st, 1960, at a salary of £900 a year, to be reviewed after 3 months, when it will be increased to 1,000 a year, subject to your proving satisfactory. We also undertake to pay your travelling expenses to and from Brighton.
Okay.
Because for the first 3 months, I was travelling backwards and forwards to Brighton until we got moved to Central Avenue, you see, got the house and so on.
And when you joined Hago, was it just in, it wasn't in Durban Road, it was just the main site then, was it?
No, there were two, son. Well, there were three. There was the factory at Arundel, the old Nineveh shipyard, and there was, which was mentioned as Doomsday Book, by the way.
Yeah.
And the one at, you know, the roundabout at Orchard Way there, you know, the big roundabout, not the first big roundabout, but the second one that goes down into the estate. By there was a small unit with about 15 people making wire baskets.
Okay.
That was what they did. They did it by crimping the wire, so it had crimps in it, and then they wove it.
You're disappearing off the screen. I could only see the top of your head.
Pardon?
I could only see the top of your head when you leant back.
Oh, right, yeah. So it wasn't welded, it was woven. So they wove them, and then they bent the wires around the frame at the top. So that's how they used to make the filing baskets for offices, you know, like that. And then just hand spray. It was really very primitive. It really was. Anyway, so I joined them then. They were a private company called, they weren't Hago then, they were called Hall and Golding. You know, Sir Ernest Golding was the managing director. And Hall had emigrated, he was an accountant, he'd emigrated to South Africa. So it was a private limited company. And it was just ripe when I joined it to, you know, to go forward, because it was behind the times very much in many ways, except in the engineering side. On the engineering side, they had a marvelous chief engineer called Frank Howarth, who was a North Country guy and a real fantastic engineer. He'd been actually an aero engineer, and he was very, very deaf, because they tested airplane engines on test beds, and then, you know, during the war, and too much of that did his hearing aid. He was extremely deaf, but he was a great guy, and he had built up a really good tool, not just a good tool room with good machinery in it, but he'd got recruited some very good craftsmen, tool makers, and method engineers, people who were thinking about ways to do things better. I got on with him very, very well, and he welcomed me as a young man wanting to sort of turn the place upside down. I got the job because there's the job was advertised, it just said South Coast Engineering Company, looking for a production controller, and that's what I was at the one while I was a management trainee. I was operating in the position of production controller, put in a production control scheme with the assistance of some consultants there, and it was very complicated. It was for the IBM 083 machine. That's the first computer made in this country, IBM. So I had that with patch boards and everything, you know, to control it. Took 3 months from start to finish at TSP for the product to go through, you know, from the first little bits going through till the finished final assembly going out the door. Anyway, I had 2 interviews in London. I called back after the first one. And from that, I learned that one other person and myself had been selected as a shortlist to go forward to Holland Golding. And we learned then it was Bognor Regis. And what was arranged, it was interviewed by the board of directors of the company. So it was a Saturday morning they'd allocated for it. And I was the second one. The first guy went in. And while he was in, the watch director took me around the factory. The first one had a tour around the factory. And then, of course, having seen the factory, I was asked for my views when I got in. I was asked for my views about what I would do. They questioned me, obviously, on my application and my qualification, because my qualifications had changed from going to sea, and I'd had 3.5 years in industry as a production controller while studying at night school 2 nights a week till 9 o'clock, 6 till 9, on the intermediate certificate for the British Institute of Management. And I had just actually qualified and got that. So I'd become a full member of the British Institute of Management. So they questioned me about that and all the rest of it. And then they started asking me about the company itself. And I'm sure that the thing it got me was that I looked at their inspection department, and it was absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
There was no control on the raw materials coming in. There was no spot inspections online. There was simply 12 women in the packing department, checking the packing department and taking bad work out. And then I saw this huge pile at the side, up the side of the factory next to Lek. There was this huge pile of steel, just a huge pile. And Les Jones told me they clear it twice a week. The Whites of Littlehampton come along with a lorry and clear it. And I looked at this, that was aghast. I said, oh, I thought it was a one-off. You do this twice a week. And I looked at the tonnage, and I thought, that's odd. So, you know, I really went to town on this and said, this is not the way to run a business. You're throwing money away and so on. Anyway, the board of directors were the chairman of the company, Harold Jones, the financial director, the managing director, the sales director, and the works director. And, you know, they were in the big boardroom. And they said, okay, if you would wait. And then they called me in and offered me the job. And I accepted it. And I was really thrilled. I came out and, of course, phoned your mum, went to a phone box in those days, and phoned your mum and said, I've got the job. And she said, oh, I've got another one, Sparks of Fangmering. I phoned up and offered you the job there. I said, oh, I'll phone them back. So I phoned them back. And he said, well, you've said you've been off this and you've taken it, but we'll offer you more and you can come here. And I said, thank you, no, but I've given my word. And they said, well, you haven't signed anything. I said, it doesn't matter, it's principle. And I was right, son. It worked out very, very well. As you know, I was 33.5 years with Holland Golding, who became Hago, and we grew. And you know, at the biggest we were was 500 employees, just on the 500. And we had a sheet metal work at over in Westgate Brewery. It was old brewery, and it had been turned into a sheet metal work. We then built all that installation down at, well, we leased it but it was to our design from Norwich Union the whole of that Durban Road development there. And then as part of my process, I had a really bad job with them, because the problem was that the chief inspector was an old friend of the managing director, but he wasn't well, you know, and he was old. And, you know, Ernest said that he was a really nice fellow, was Ernie Gold. And he said, Bob, I can't just chuck him out. I said, no, give him a nice pension, and pension him off if he's worked well for the company. But I went out and got a proper qualified inspector in, and we put in the right systems. And of course, it was what that led us to, son. It was that I was getting the backing of this engineer all the time, because when they were, the technology at the time was to do single spot welding. They had little machines that used to tread a pedal and just, you know, and that was what people did. But Frank Howarth was looking at multiple welding and big scale and big flow production and that. And he couldn't do it with, he had the knowledge, and he knew he could make the machines with basic machines from Skiaki or British Federal. He'd take them and alter them, put pneumatics on them and everything like that, you know, and design these. They were very clever, the folio machine, which then only took 2 people to produce, you know, 10,000 a week, you know, these filing baskets. That was 10 people down at Durban Road, down at the little roundabout. But what it was, the thing that was restricting them was the quality of the steel at that time. And we couldn't get from British Steel, we went up to Sheffield and everything, trying to get consistent hardness steel. Because if you don't get it consistent, if you try to put electricity down many paths, it'll go to the one with the highest pressure, and it goes through, and all the others fail, and you then have to have people spot welding all the breakages. So it was imperative we do that. So that's how we bought John Pring's mill up in Sandbach in Cheshire to produce our own steel. And that's why we led the whole country, because there was no one doing that. It was little backshed places, you know, doing single spot. And we were doing 150 kVA welders, bashing out stuff. And, you know, we made stuff like refrigerator condensers. And we supplied Scandinavia, South Africa, as well as all the British ones had our condensers on them, because we produced them in a very efficient way, just opening up that and putting hundreds of wires welded at one blow, and then formed up and so on. Anyway, it was very exciting, actually.
Oh, you've disappeared.
Oh, it was very exciting, really. It was a good job. And my salary kept going up too, which was very nice. Yes. But life was very, you know, managers in those days didn't push themselves hard. They took life very easy. You know, Les would go and drift off to play golf in the afternoon, like, you know. And we had a director's dining room for the directors. A lady came in. Yes. And of course, we had sherry and everything like that. But after a little while, I couldn't do it because I felt I wanted to go to sleep after lunch, you know, with a sherry and a full meal and that. So I used to come home, and your mum used to give me have ready a sandwich and a bit of cake or something, biscuit, and I'd lie down in the settee for 20 minutes and then get back because it was an hour. But I was first production controller, and within 3 months they fired the factory manager, and I was made factory manager because that was what the plan was. The factory manager wasn't up to it. And then I was made production director, which took in the other departments, you know, engineering, work study, all that sort of thing. And then it took in, I was then made works director when Les retired, and I took in buying and purchasing. And then I get, by that time, what actually happened was the majority shareholder in Hall and Golding, who had bought the shareholding privately, because a private company, White, he died in the Channel Islands unexpectedly, and there was income tax to pay, and they couldn't, they couldn't afford. They had to sell, and no one had the money to buy it. The other directors hadn't, so they put it up for sale, and it ended up with two very large companies coming to look at us. That's quite an interesting thing. People walking through, taking them through, talking to them about the company, and that I did most of that. And there was Parker's, who was Parker Pens at New Haven, and Parker Parking Meters in those days was a big thing, a Canadian company, and they had wireworks in Australia and Canada. So there would be cross-fertilization there, you see. Then there was Bullough, and Bullough were a company with about 25, they were a conglomerate, an English conglomerate, shipbuilding, sweet and confectionery, wooden transformers, pigs for pipelines. They call them pigs for cleaning pipelines. There's a device you get. There's a company that made that, but they came in. Unfortunately, it came down to a bidding war, and in the end, Bullough was successful, but the then managing director, Ernie had retired with a heart attack, and the sales director had become managing director. Here's Bob Fawkes. And him and I were good friends. We had dinner at his house, and we would have a drink together and so on. But he did a deal for himself with a subcontractor.
Yeah.
And he then told Bullough and the other shareholders, that they wouldn't sign unless he got, I can't remember what it was, 50,000 or something like that, and so on. This was news to me. I had a phone call late at night from the chairman of the company saying, what's this then, Bob? Why have you decided you want to hold up the shareholders to ransom, demanding 10,000 or 15,000 pounds? And I said, I beg your pardon? I said, this is Bob Reddie here. yeah, but you're doing that with Bob Fawkes. I said, this is the first I've ever heard of it. Well, I don't know anything about it. Oh, come up here. So I had to go up to London at short notice one night, go up and see him. And because the chairman was arranging the sale of the company on behalf of all the shareholders.
Yes.
So he said, Bob, you don't know anything about that? I said, no. And I said, as far as I know, I spoke to Pat Mallor, who was sales manager, and he didn't know anything about it either. But Bob said, when we questioned Bob, he said, oh yeah, I put in so much for you. I said, but you didn't bloody discuss it with us. Why? What's all that about? Anyway, the chairman said, look, Bob, it's not the way to do things. I said, no, I agree. I said, that's it. So they said, okay, we have to dispense with the services of the managing director, Bob. Yeah. So we want you to be acting managing director for the takeover. So on Monday, I want you to go down there and meet Bob and tell him what we've done before he comes. Before he arrives, get the carpenter to change the locks on the office, his office door, so he couldn't get in. Yes. So I had to ask the gatekeeper to give me a call as soon as Bob came in. I had to go out and say, I'm sorry, Bob, you know that things haven't gone well for you. And, they've dismissed you, so I said, unfortunately, it's a position that I can't allow you in here. Your locks have been changed and you can't get into, you've got to arrange with them to come down and they will go round with you.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was it. And I was welcomed into the Buller Group of companies. The group managing director, Derek Battle, whom I got on with very well indeed. Anyway, I know you'll think this is odd, but after one time when we were having lunch together,
Yeah.
he said, Bob, now you're doing a good job here, you know, you carry on then? And I said, no, not really. I said, I don't want to do this job. I'm not fitted for it. It's not my expertise. I don't, you know, doing a lot of marketing and all the rest of it is just not me. I'm really, you know, what I can do is production and things like that, you know, and organizing things here. So he said, you think it through. So I sort of thought it through. And he said, okay. He said, well, can you hold the fort then for a few months?
You need to come back again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what I can do is that.
Yeah.
So the getting the right man for the job was difficult. They used to bring him down and, you know, and I'd walk around and have a chat with him and so on.
Yeah.
But I was amazed at the age of them. They were all younger than me.
Yeah.
And they were from the Cranleigh Business School, where they'd been the prime pupil for that year. Or, you know,
okay.
That's where they used to headhunt.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's what happened with Buller. We would headhunt young people like that, bring them into the office, and then. But it was it got some results, but it was quite bizarre working with it. Anyway, the company grew. When we took over the mills in Sandbach, I had to do. Oh, by the way, all this time, I had told them that I was going to continue my studies because although I get the intermediate certificate, I wanted a diploma in management studies.
Your head's a bit low.
Yeah, diploma in management studies. So I had arranged for them that Tuesdays and Thursdays I would leave at 5 o'clock and drive to Brighton for like, you know, and your mum again used to give me sandwiches I used to eat on the way over there. And I'd get home about 10 o'clock because the road then was a winding road. It wasn't this road we got now. And so I carried on studying, and 3 years later, I got it with credits. So with that came things like I was made a fellow of the British Institute of Management, and then a fellow of the Institute of Managers. I was also involved at that time with the Productivity Association. So I was chairman of the South East Hand Productivity Association. I used to do this in the evenings, not during the day. And it covered Isle of Wight, Havant, Portsmouth, across to Littlehampton, up as far as Arundel and Midhurst. That was the South East Hand. And in that, I did one of the first taking it into private hands, because it had been, the Productivity Association was a thing started during the war to increase productivity of...
You're a bit low again, Dad.
Yeah, war materials.
Yeah.
And it was made up of college tutors in management studies, business managers, people in management, and trade unionists, the leaders of trade unions in the districts. And that was very, very good, because it was very good for me to be mixing with the trade unions and so on.
Yeah.
When I went into the company, it was, I had no unions. But it was inevitable. They started having closed shops. So I warned the board that, you know, rather than be forced into it, you know, to take the initiative and, you know, meet them and talk to them about it, because I'd had the advantage of talking to these blokes. And I knew that we could get along if we sat down together and did it. And that's what we did. We arranged for meetings yearly where we would exchange notes of what they were looking for and what they would have had meetings with us. The one thing that I did do was the company agreed to pay for the wages of the staff when they were on training to be shop stewards. So it was in our interest that they behaved properly, you know, and went by the rules. And it worked well, son. It really worked good. Yeah. We grew big, went up to Sandbach, and that was really in the dark ages. The family had taken money out of the business and hadn't put anything in for yonks. And it was like the dark ages. It was awful. We had to invest quite a bit of money into the wire plant. But the wire working one, which was sort of making odd bits and pieces for people, was very unprofitable, and we just closed that down pretty quickly. The second one was a wireworks like Hago's, but on a smaller scale. And one of the principal thing they made was clothes airers, you know, these plastic stands that you stand washing on to dry. And again, it's a very odd thing, son, but there are different rates of, because we were able to measure work with our work study, we knew what the standard minutes were for producing different things. And we had a different rate of production at Shripney than we did in Arundel. Arundel's was lower. It was, but it was lower and the quality was better. There weren't so many rejects.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a country sort of, there's a difference. But the one in Sandbach, they were just awful. If they could only use one hand instead of two, that's what they were doing. Like, you know, they'd be puffing like this and doing that. Yeah. And, you know, it was just awful. So I had to send the training. I'd developed things so we had a high turnover of people when I went there. And I knew that what we had to do was to be selective about the people that we're bringing in, because some of them would never have made it anyway. But after about 6 weeks, they just went, you see, because they couldn't figure out how to do it, because they weren't trained. They were just left with somebody, you know, beside them to sew it. And so I sent one of the best people I had, Molly Hammond, on a training within industry for a trainer. And she became chief training thing. And she put her mind to it. And then when people came for a job, she'd give them a set of tasks to do, you know, like putting square holes, you know, square things into square and different things like that. And so people weren't selected. And we actually got it, the turnover down quite well. Yeah, very good. That was well. Another thing about it is I'm very pleased about, you probably saw pictures of your mum and I, we kept having the flag above Hago there, have the National Award for Safety, for the safety in industry. Winning it each year. We had a good record for that, yeah.
And you eventually decided to have your own transport fleet. Why was that?
There was a transport fleet, son. What actually happened was, it was a time of us, Harold Wilson, I can't remember the date exactly, but it was when Harold Wilson, Labour government were in, and they were talking about a national transport policy, as they have in France and Germany. You know how heavy goods vehicles can't go on during the weekend and things like that. And in Germany, you can only go 150 kilometers without going on otherwise you have to go on a piggyback railway. So there were all these regulations, and this was to get traffic off the road onto the rail and ships and, you know, the waterways. there was a problem there, and we were going into the common market, and we needed to have a proper transport manager. So it coincided with a consultant's report in the company, which showed that the strength of the company was in production and engineering and things like that. And the thing that was running away and taking the profit was the warehousing and dispatch department, which was growing at an alarming rate. We had big warehouses in Chichester full of stuff because the salespeople wanted everything always there in huge amounts.
Yeah, they always do.
And it was, and the guy who'd been recruited to run the transport, he was just empire building. He wanted to maintain all the forklift trucks and all the cars and everything. So he was building a real big garage and everything. And we kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was taking the money away, of course, you know, that we should have been plowing back into the company and making more profit. Anyway, it was decided to take it away from the sales and marketing department because they didn't do anything with it. They didn't have any input in it, didn't control it. It was headless. So they asked me if I would take it on, and they pressed the sales department to give it up. They didn't like it because it shrunk them down to just getting out and selling. So I took over the sales office, warehousing and transport. And when I took on the transport, there was the thing I noticed was that the lorries lying unattended, just parked up the back at Durban Road. And I said, "Why is that?" Well, they said, "We have to keep these there in case there's a break."
You disappeared again. You need to move the.
You said, "You know, we have to have these spares for breakdowns." And I thought, "Well, that's a funny way of doing things. You know, why don't they have good vehicles to begin with?" Anyway, once I did it, I realized that the whole thing was ridiculous. They had vehicles going every week to most parts of Britain. There was one that went as far as Aberdeen, and he set off on Monday.
Yeah.
He spent so much time on the road getting to his customers that he was making very few delivery time. You know, it was very costly. And I just took these out, and I knew what I had to do was get a transport company in, like TNT and people like that. And just all I did was give me a keen price. So I got several companies like that to give me a price for delivering all these things. And all I did was kept a fleet for bulk deliveries, you know, for full vehicle deliveries to main places like London, Manchester, Birmingham, you know, let them do the rest. And they used to just back up a trailer, and we could put it on the one dock because we had two docks there, and they could just gradually put the stuff in, like, and they'd come and collect it every day that it be cleared, you see. And as far as the vehicles, they were the most awful vehicles. The driver was telling you get to a hill, Debenham. You get to a hill and you dump right down, and you're going down to about 3 or 4 miles an hour going up a hill. That was how small the engines were and how big they were. Big removal vehicles, you know, big light plywood things.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had to do something, so I had to look at that, and I decided that the best way to do it would be to design drop-off bodies, you know, and there were several around that you could drop the body and take the vehicle out, and, you know, and move containers. And I had arranged with the British Rail Freightliner down at Southampton to do. We would take an Arctic with 2 boxes on it down there, and they would put them on their trains and move them up the country, you see. And I then had spent a lot of time going to Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, and so on, and made arrangement with vehicles, garages there who had contractors, and arranged for them to have our vehicle, but they supplied the driver and made the delivery. So they would go in and collect the box from Manchester to Birmingham. So that was all arranged. We got the bodies made by Able Systems. We got the first one was a Leyland, but after that we got Scanias, which are a much better vehicle. But just when we were about to go, you need a certificate for it, and the certificate didn't come through. And Able Systems said, Mr. Reddie, there's something wrong here. So we'd given them all the drawings and everything like that of the vehicles, and they'd given us the dimensions that we could work to. And then they'd found that they had a bridge, a tunnel, not far outside Southampton. They would knock the corners off. I couldn't believe it, that they didn't know the dimensions of their railway. Just unbelievable. We never did do it. You know, we used them for Arctics and for going abroad and things like that, but we never used the boxes as they were meant to be, transported by rail. And if you've watched the news in the last week, you'll see they're doing major works at Southampton now.
Yes.
Because they're having to do that work now and upgrade it. But we were, in the end, we were the leading manufacturer. Gradually, companies came up, they folded, and we go up and we'd have a look at them and decide if we were interested in buying them. But normally, we used to let them go, and then go in after after they've gone down, and buy up some equipment and stuff like that, and just bring it back. If they had any products, we would buy the products, the product design for them and so on.
Yeah.
But we had, it was very successful. We were really, I mean, how many nursery guards, and I mean, when we built that plant down at Durban Road, it was very, very efficient, wasn't it? I mean, there was the dipping line, and then there was the electrostatic line. Then there was 2 electrostatic lines in the end, was there? But yeah, 40,000 volts. That was something that I brought into the company. Ernie Golding had done the first ones, and he was convinced that they were no good because paint had gone everywhere, and that was because they hadn't realised that it must be too conductive. Otherwise, the electricity would make them go solid in the feed pipe to the spinner. They would just, if you get metallic there, it would just form up and block it.
What eventually happened? I mean, Hago eventually closed, didn't it, after you left?
Yeah, well, it was bought. It was bought by, oh dear.
Not Mothercare?
No. A big company up in near Manchester, Hoselock.
Okay.
Made hose reels, but they bought the lot, other than the little nursery fire guard machine, which Mick Underwood and Robbie, what was his name now, the engineer, they made an offer for it. And they agreed it, so they kept on and made it. But of course, fire guards went out as well, didn't they? But you think the number of, you must have seen it, the number of filing baskets we made. I mean, we loaded the market with them. We just poured them in. And at one time, we did the same with incinerators. We put in a line where we made this incinerator at Shripney. We put on a line at the end that degreased them and painted them, and all the guy did was put a label on them at the end, and we supplied that, to Woolworths. Everyone had our incinerators and compost containers. These used to go to Sweden in huge amounts. That's where the vehicles went. It'd be a 32-ton vehicle up
And of course, you used to make a lot of things for electric refrigeration, didn't you?
Well, we made it for all of them. Hot Point was one of the biggest.
Okay.
Yeah, Lek, unfortunately, they really lost a lot of business. There was a breakup of Lek. There was Joel was the joint managing director with Purley, and Joel was in charge of the technical side, and they were very untechnical. They'd just come off the floor, son. They didn't have qualified people in there, and they started making refrigerators because they went on a plane and took one from Italy and brought it back and then copied it, but they had no idea of the principles involved in refrigeration, which is bloody amazing. What they were using, the wires on the back of the tube on the back is a heat exchanger, really. That's what it's doing.
Yeah.
It's really getting rid of the heat, and it's a tube like that with wires on it. And they only use, I think it was 8 wires each side to screw it through the cabinet. Well, what that meant was that it wasn't as efficient as it could be, and the government decided that in future fridges have to have star ratings 1, 2, and 3, to say how good it is at maintaining its temperatures, right? And they used to supply the electricity board with the Lek refrigerator. They used to call it the Electra. And that was the most big business, right? They had other business, but Electra was the big one, the electricity board. But this February, we were making these condensers for them, and everything was going through. And suddenly we had this panic from Charlie Purdy. Could I go over there and see him and bring my sales manager? So I went over there and found that they'd lost the order to Electra because they hadn't done what they said they were supposed to do. They'd been warned that they had to get it up to this. And it was because they didn't understand how to do it. They said, how do you do that? Now, I said, well, just hang on a minute. I made a call and got the guy over from one of our development engineers, Brian. I said, Brian, could you come over here? So he then explained the principles of the heat exchanger on the back and says there's the first is the tube, but then there's the circumference of the wires. And if you put many wires, you increase the circumference, because they're round, they're taking heat from it. And the more wires you can get on, the better the capacity is to do that. Therefore, the generator, the electric generator doesn't have to work so hard, you see, because it's well, anyway. So they said, oh, right, well, can you design one for us? So he went back and he came back to, within, the next day, we were back over there saying that. And they said, and can you do that? And they said, yes, we'll tool up for it. We could get it done in about 10 days and we can be in production. They said, okay, get cracking. We'll get tubes to you, because the tubes from Armco were free issue. But we were just amazed that nobody in the engineering team knew about the principles of first and secondary areas. Anyway, and in the meantime, there were all the ones that we had made for them and were on refrigerators, and they cut them all off, stopped the line, cut them all off, and then they said, "We want you to rework these." Well, they were already painted. So they sent them back to us, and of course, We said, "Oh, are you sure? It wouldn't it be cheaper just to throw them away and just get new ones?"
Yeah.
Oh, we've got to have them. So we had all these places all with wire brushes. We had put them into strippers and then wire brushing, trying to get all this paint off and that, and then add the other wires. And of course, doing a thing where you're filling in wires in between
Yeah.
others isn't
Yeah.
quite the same as, just putting them all in like
Mm.
that, as the girls do, and closing the book and welding down on them. So anyway, we got cracking on this and got them going so that they had production going. And then the tubes dried up. I said, "Well, what's happened here?" And he said, "Oh, we've got another supplier." I said, "Got another supplier? What about us?" And all the rest of it. And I said, "Oh, you were taking us to the cleaners." We were really very, very annoyed about it. And it was the buyer who had got it into his head that we were taking because of the cost that we were doing it at cost, the stripping of the old ones, which was expensive. I mean, can you expect
Well, rework very expensive.
So anyway, as far as we were concerned, there was bad things with us, but
Yeah.
but I used to meet Charlie Purley at Rotary and Round Table, and he used to sit with me and we'd chat and things like that. And I thought, I said, well, he's the buyer, and I can't have a dog and bark. I said, well, okay. I said, it hasn't done us any good, but anyway, we didn't worry because we got other customers. It wasn't a fatal thing. It was an annoyance of it, having helped them.
Yeah.
But,
Can you remember your last day at Hago?
Pardon?
Can you remember your last day at Hago?
Yes. I had because I told the board that I was definite that I was retiring when I was 65. On the Friday that I retired in 1994, I had already got my replacement in, and he'd been in about 6 months, been training, and so on. And I took everything out of my office and let him get in there, so that he'd be there with his team from there. I didn't go back, son. Yeah, there was just no, when I'd done it. I meet people obviously from Hago, and I talk to them. But anyway, yeah, we had. It was a good, and yeah, you remember the party they gave me.
Do I? No.
At the Royal Norfolk.
Oh, the Royal Norfolk. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
They did give me a party. It was 130 of us. Your whole family were there, and they gave me a computer. It was a lovely evening. All my friends there, all the managers there. Yeah, it was good. I had a really good. I was very fortunate. That doesn't happen now. People don't have companies for 3.5 years, and yeah.
No.
But it was a good experience. I happened at the right time, son, because management they'd really got into lackadaisical, and we'd fallen way behind the Japanese, our enemies during the Second World War, Japan, Italy, and Germany, and they were being financed by America, who was scared of the Reds, so they were pumping money into them, whereas we were on uppers paying back America for the leased land that we'd had, all the stuff, tanks and ships and everything with that. So we were poor as paupers and couldn't afford to buy the latest machinery. It was very unfortunate. We won the war, but we lost the peace and the business to begin with. It was very, very hard. We were the poor relation, really. Yeah, but no, I had a good time at Hago. When I got my first car, it was amazing. They gave me a car, and you just put it up by they had a up by the offices. They had a petrol and a petrol and diesel
Oh,
pump,
yeah.
and it used to just tell them to go up and fill it, and they used to fill it. No, it wasn't part of wages. You just
Yeah.
give them it, like, and they
Yeah.
wash the car for you and everything. Yeah, it's life was what were the dining room and as directors we had it very easy.
Okay. Well, we'll call it an end there today.